Justice. It's kind of a loaded term, especially perhaps in the church. It gets bogged down in political connotations and thoughts or opinions on the American justice system, or perhaps even policing in America. But we just read from the prophet Micah, written centuries upon centuries before America was even a colony under British rule, that to truly be in right relationship with God, there are three things that are required of us: walking humbly with God, loving kindness, and doing justice. So talking about and doing justice is inherently biblical and inherently Christian. So as I am speaking this morning, if you find yourself bristling a little bit, or if something rubs you the wrong way, or if you outright disagree with what I am saying, don't just tune me out. We've all done it. I have had this conversation probably more than once with a friend of mine. Oh, hey, how was church today? I don't really know. I stopped listening after the pastor said such and such. The music was really nice, though. Please, don't tune me out. Sit with your discomfort. Ask yourself why what I'm saying might be making you feel uncomfortable. And please feel free to email me after worship and ask to talk about it. We can get lunch or we can get coffee, and I will listen to your thoughts as we engage further with this topic of justice. Now, before I dive too deep into this, I think it's important to take a moment to define justice. It's a word that we all have heard, and we all have probably used the word as well. Supreme Court justices, justice of the peace, the justice system, justice has been served. I could go on. The Hebrew word that we see in the Old Testament is mishpat. And yes, it can refer to retributive justice, the kind of justice that most people think of when you hear the word. If you steal something, you pay the consequences. However, more often, mishpat refers to restorative justice. Restorative justice is putting ourselves in right relationship with others and with God. It means seeking out the vulnerable and helping. Mishpat goes beyond charity, though. Taking part in restorative justice in mishpat means advocating for vulnerable people and taking action to change social structures in order to prevent injustice. Now, I promise you, this is not just some harebrained, hippy-dippy scheme from the new young pastor. The call to practice this type of justice, this mishpat, this restorative justice, is found throughout the Bible. In Proverbs 31, the author writes, "Speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." The prophet Jeremiah shares these words of God: "Act with justice and righteousness, and deliver from the hand of the oppressor anyone who has been robbed. And do no wrong or violence to the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow." The psalmist writes, "The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers. God upholds the orphan and the widow, but the way of the wicked God brings to ruin." On the opposite end of the spectrum from mishpat is rasha. Rasha in Hebrew means guilty or in the wrong. When used to refer to a person, rasha indicates that that person has mistreated another person. It indicates that that person has ignored the identity as a child of God. That is the injustice that God seeks to root out. We are all children of God. We are all created in the image of God. The psalmist reminds us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And in Jeremiah, God reminds us that God has known us and has loved us since before we can even imagine. To treat another human as any less or as any more is to perpetuate injustice. Everyone is a child of God. Everyone, white, black, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latinx, indigenous. Everyone, straight or gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual. Everyone, woman, man, boy, girl, transgender, non-binary. Everyone, Democrat, Republican, young, old, everyone with any label, identity, or designation that you or I or anyone could think to use is created in the image of God. And therefore, everyone is deserving of dignity and of mishpat, right relationship among others. Justice is the very nature of God. Isaiah 30 says, "Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you. Therefore God will rise up to show mercy to you, for the Lord is a God of justice." Justice is inherent to the activity of God. From Genesis, "Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And from Psalm 9, "You have maintained my just cause. You have sat on the throne giving righteous judgment." The justice in the Bible, God's justice, is, as one commentator writes, a transformative virtue that seeks to establish or restore community while aiming to balance personal good with the common good. We see this biblical justice play out in three main ways. First is commutative justice, or justice between community members. This is the justice that we see in the story of Zacchaeus, when he decides that he will give back anything that he has overcharged people while collecting their taxes. The second uses a term that is even more loaded than the word justice itself, so please stay with me here, and that is social justice. In this sense, social justice is the social order that is necessary to usher in the third type of biblical justice, which is distributive justice. Justice involving an equitable distribution of goods, benefits, and burdens within a community. This can be illustrated by thinking of the early church as described in the book of Acts. Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as had any need. Distributive justice is also the type of justice that we see in the beloved story of the Good Samaritan and in Mary's Magnificat, which we heard read just a few minutes ago. Mary's words in her song, which Pastor Stephen reminded us she sings not long after learning that she is going to give birth to the Son of God. Those words show us a world turned upside down. At least that's what it looks like by our standards. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. These are huge reversals that are caused by God, and they display God's power not to turn the world upside down, but to turn the world right side up. An unwed, pregnant peasant girl from Nazareth, a poor backwater town in the shadow of the Roman city Sepphoris, sings this vision of God's justice. this image of God's kingdom on earth. The words that Mary uses, in particular the verb tense, it's interesting. In English, we have to translate it as being in the past tense, but there is so much more to it than that. By declaring what God has done, Mary makes the past history a present reality, while simultaneously bringing a vision of the future into the present time. As T.S. Eliot wrote, "The end is where we start from." Or say that the end precedes the beginning, and the end and the beginning were always there, before the beginning and after the end. As confusing as that might sound, that is the nature of God's call to justice. Our faith is not about punching our ticket into the afterlife. As Christians, we are not called to live a good life so that we get to go to heaven. We are called to participate in bringing God's kingdom to earth, to bring this future vision into the present time. We say it every week in the Lord's Prayer. "Thy will be done, thy kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven." But how do we do that? How do we participate in God's kingdom on earth? By doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with God. By bringing down the powerful and raising up the lowly. By feeding the hungry while trusting that those who have can take care of themselves. It is not a role reversal. The lowly are not lifted up and placed on the thrones in the place of the powerful. Rather, everyone is treated with the same dignity that they deserve as one who is created in the image of God. That is God's justice, and that is God's kingdom on earth.
And so this is the surprising message of the biblical story. God's response to humanity's legacy of injustice is to give us a gift, the life of Jesus. He did righteousness and justice, and yet he died on behalf of the guilty. But then God declared Jesus to be the righteous one when he rose from the dead. And so now Jesus offers his life to the guilty so that they too can be declared righteous before God, not because of anything they've done, but because of what Jesus did for them.
The earliest followers of Jesus experienced this righteousness from God, not just as a new status, but as a power that changed their lives and compelled them to act in surprising new ways.
Yeah, if God declared someone righteous when they didn't deserve it, the only reasonable response is to go and seek righteousness and justice for others.
This is a radical way of life, and it's not always convenient or easy. It's courageously making other people's problems my problems.
This is what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. It's about a lifetime commitment fueled by the words of the ancient prophet Micah. God has told you, humans, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
That is a video from the Bible Project, and I wish I could have shown the whole 6.5-minute video on justice. I encourage you to seek it out and watch it. But like that video clip said, this is a radical way of life. In God's kingdom, wealth and power have no ultimate influence, but rather they are brought into subservience of the lowly. As Mary sings about this, she is singing a song of praise. This is a good thing in God's eyes. And yet to our ears, though, it can sound terrifying. It's not convenient, it's not easy. It is a life full of joy and amazement, yes, but it's also foolishness and danger. God's plan to bring God's kingdom to earth is for many an embarrassing and threatening challenge to good order. We all participate in injustice, either actively or passively. We receive benefits or privileges from unjust systems. And history and the biblical story have shown us that when the oppressed receive justice, they often become oppressors themselves. That is not God's justice. God's justice reminds us that all humans are equal before God and have the right to be treated with equity and with dignity as one who has been created in the image of God. In order to do that, we need to truly believe that God is the source of our being and live our lives as if God is enough. But so often we have a death grip on our stuff instead of trusting that God will provide. We walk around with an air of pity rather than compassion for the poor. Theologian Walter Brueggemann writes, "A myth of scarcity will never generate bread for the world, but only bread for us and ours. The lyric of abundance asserts that in the hand of the generative and generous God, scarcity is not true." That lyric of abundance is so much more than religious sentiment. It is a message that should encompass our whole lives, our ethics, our social structures, our economics, yes, even our politics. Can God be enough? Can God be the source of our being? When God moves into the life of the world, everything changes. Mary's song brings good news to the poor and the downtrodden. And if we are living in the myth of scarcity, it is scary news for us. But when we put our trust and our faith in God and God's plan, when we truly participate in bringing God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, Mary's song is good news for the whole world, as all receive the dignity and the justice that they and we deserve as children of God, as beings who are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.